What is your deepest secret? We each have a vice that we choose to hide from the world for one reason or another, but what happens when this vice is forcibly brought to the light? I took a truth serum with my friends, and now one of them is going to kill me. I have a guys' night with my two best friends, Paul and Serge, that's been running since we were in our 20s. Over the years, we've traded the PBR for nice wine and the cheap cigarettes for cigars, but the idea is basically the same. We get drunk and talk shit until we get tired, and then put on a movie or play video games. Then Paul and I go back to our families, and Serge goes back to his single life. We'd been drinking for maybe an hour when I started to feel funny. Not drunk, but actually kind of hyper, like I had a million thoughts racing through my head that I needed to tell someone. "It's hitting you," said Paul. "I must be losing my tolerance," I said. I barely drank these days. Too busy with 2 kids at home and my wife finishing nursing school. Paul smirked a little. "Not the alcohol," he said. "The other thing. The thing I added to the decanter. In vino veritas." "What the hell are you talking about?" Serge asked, starting to look edgy. Paul held up a small vial. "Well, I can't pronounce the actual name of the thing, but it's basically truth serum. Got it from one of the lab techs in my office. Crazy stuff. It actually works. Also kind of makes you feel like you're on speed, which is kind of a bonus." "This is bull," I said, getting up from the couch. "I'm out of here." Serge watched Paul with angry eyes, trying not to say anything. In all our years of friendship, we'd only had a handful of deeper talks. "Come on," said Paul, blocking the door. "What's the problem with a little truth if you've got nothing to hide?" "You want the truth, dude?" I asked. "How about I'm pretty f***ing upset that someone I consider to be a friend decided to drug me against my will. Now get out of the way. I'm gonna go sleep this thing off." "Not until you tell me if you're sleeping with Jess," he said, suddenly much more serious. I rolled my eyes. I realized it was taking all my willpower not to launch into a long tirade. I was holding in my words like they were piss after a long car ride. They needed to come out. Just answer me, man," he said, and I could tell he was close to either throwing a punch or breaking down in tears. I'd seen him do both plenty of times over the years. "I just want to know if it's true. I remember you telling me all the time how hot she was back when we first started dating." I tried to bite my tongue. I tasted blood, but it did no good. I had to answer him, regardless of the consequences. "Jess is a train wreck," I told him. "She totally ignores your kids, and she treats you like an ATM. I guarantee you she's cheating with someone, but it's definitely not me." For a second, everyone was quiet. Then Paul came in for an awkward hug. "I'm sorry," said Paul after a few seconds. "I should have known you would never... shit. I'm sorry. You guys want to dust off the Genesis? Maybe go a little retro? I'm sorry. He started reaching into the cabinet under the TV to look for some of the older consoles. "I'm a serial killer," said Serge, all of a sudden. It's the first time I've said that out loud. I guess I'm not exactly sure what I am. I don't have any kind of particular method. I've been doing it since I was in high school. I just look for opportunities. Like my first guy I did, he was just standing on a vista looking out over the mountains. And I just pushed him off. I felt like a kind of calm release in me for a few minutes after I did it. A kind of peace I'd never felt before. Paul and I stared at him, trying to register if what he was saying was real. "You're joking," I said. "Tell us you're joking." "When I joined the army, I thought maybe I could kind of channel it, you know? Kill a few bad guys and feel good about myself. And what happened? 2 years of sweating my ass off in the desert. Not in Iraq, not in Afghanistan, in fucking New Mexico. Not a single whiff of combat. I killed a hitchhiker and 2 cadets over the course of my time there." As he spoke, he pulled out a hunting knife. I remember mocking him when he bought it, calling him a mall ninja. Now I wondered how many people he'd killed with it. My heart was thudding in my ears. I looked around the room for any kind of weapon, but all I saw were Xbox controllers and wine glasses. "Now it's starting to get worse," he said, his eyes cold, the knife shaking in his hands. "It's like I can't be alone with anyone without thinking about how easy it would be to choke the life out of them. I leave these bars with women, and I wonder if any of them would be able to remember my face if the cops came around asking questions." "I'm scared," said Paul. "I'm really, really fucking scared right now." "You should be," said Serge, trying not to meet his eyes. "I wish you hadn't given me that drug, Paul. I honestly don't know what to do. I feel like my life is pretty much over now. I don't like killing people, I know. It's the easiest way to get caught, and you guys are my best friends. The only people I care about in the whole world. I'm terrible at keeping secrets, Paul said, unable to control himself. I'll call the police as soon as I leave this room. You know how I am. I know, said Serge. And then, suddenly, Paul picked up his wine glass and tried to smash it against Serge's head. He missed completely, tumbling over the couch. I almost wanted to laugh, but then I looked down and saw the knife sticking out of the side of Paul's head. Serge had stuck him right in the temple. Serge removed the knife in one swift motion, even as Paul's body continued to twitch involuntarily on the floor. Serge was crying now as he wiped the blood from the knife with his shirt. Look what you made me do, he said, looking down at Paul. Idiot. I should have known he'd try something like this. Then he looked over at me, tears streaking down his face. Now what? He asked. I can't die, I said. Think of my girls. I know, he said. I know, but I have to kill you. I have to. He took a step toward me, and as he did, I looked down and saw this last little glimmer of life in Paul's eyes. As Serge tried to step over him to get to me, Paul grabbed his foot, and Serge tripped. Run, Paul mouthed. And I did. As I tore out the front door and into the dark street, I heard Serge screaming behind me. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you. It's been about a week since everything went down, and I just got back from Paul's funeral. The whole time, I was looking over my shoulder, waiting for Serge to show up. Maybe he was there and I just didn't see him. At night, I checked the locks a dozen times and watched the feeds from my new security cameras on my phone. So far, so good. Based on what Serge told us that night, he's not prone to taking crazy risks. He called himself opportunistic, but maybe that's what scares me the most. Because when he yelled out that he was going to kill me, he was still on the serum. He was telling the truth. And I know someday I'll be standing on the curb waiting for a bus or an Uber, and I'll suddenly feel a pair of hands behind me, pushing me towards my doom. When I get these dark thoughts at night, I sit up in bed, sweating and holding my knees. My wife tries to hold me and tell me it'll be okay. She brushes her hands softly against my hair and says, "They'll catch him, baby. You're gonna be here for a long, long time with me. We've got high school graduations to attend, and weddings to pay for, and grandchildren to meet. You're not going anywhere. You're not going to die." And I know that she is lying. Fear, you'll come to find, is often subjective. Some of us have a fear of heights, others a fear of what lurks in the night. This next story will prove that some of this world's fears are simply universal. Most people think my job is pure nightmare fuel. I used to disagree with them. I work as a cell tower technician. You've probably seen videos on YouTube of some guy clinging to the top of a metal tower in the middle of a huge empty nothing. That's me. It's about the best job you can get where I live without a high school diploma, and the only real source of entertainment to boot. As a perpetual screw-up with an appetite for adrenaline, I was basically a star candidate. Really, the only two requirements are a basic level of physical conditioning and a complete lack of fear, both of which I have. Or at least, I thought I did. 2 weeks ago, the company I work for, who shall remain unnamed lest the corporate overlords find this post, sent me out to a job site about 50 miles out of town. Rarely do I have to cross state lines, but the tower in question was about as far out of the way as it gets. Big one, too. 400-something odd feet, meant to bounce signals all the way across the Appalachian Mountains from one sleepy mining town to the next. That suited me fine. I prefer working where prying eyes won't see me for one reason: base jumping. For the uninitiated, base jumping entails throwing yourself off of a big object with a parachute on. You know when you jumped off the roof of your house as a 10-year-old with a blanket and broke your ankle and your stepdad came out and beat you with a belt before he drove you to the hospital? No? Maybe it's just me. Anyhow, base jumping is basically the grown-up version of that, minus the broken ankle and the beating, hopefully. Luckily for me, all secluded cell towers happen to be the perfect place for this kind of hobby. The morning I was supposed to head out, there was a fine mist sinking down into the hollers around where I lived. The locals call it moonshine weather, which translates to stay the hell inside and get drunk instead of going to work. As tempted as I was to do just that, I'd been hoping they'd send me out this way for months, and I couldn't pass up the opportunity. I should have trusted my gut. Instead, I brewed myself a shitty thermos of coffee, threw my gear into the back of my Jeep, and Well, you get the idea. I drove a few hours out to the site, fooling myself all the way that the weather would clear up soon and it would be a sunny climb all the way to the top. I'd packed my parachute along with my other gear. I used to bring a GoPro along until I realized that recording the sort of behavior that would give an OSHA rep an aneurysm probably isn't smart. I can be smart when I remember to. Anyway, I parked my Jeep outside the fence around the tower and typed the code into the electronic gate. Someone had strung razor wire over the top of it, but I doubted anyone visited much and the wire was crumbling in places. I figured anyone who really wanted to wouldn't find it hard to bypass. My suspicions were confirmed as I drove past the tiny maintenance shed sitting in the corner of the lot and found every inch of the corrugated metal covered in graffiti. I admired it as I opened the padlock and retrieved one of the bulbs from inside. The work order said this tower needed an aircraft warning light replaced. You know, those blinking red lights that let you know there's a giant tower out there in the dark. I took one from a dusty shelf and tucked it into my rucksack, threw it on my climbing rig, checked my chute one last time, and started the climb. The start of a climb is always boring. One hand over the other, rung by rung, you're almost impatiently waiting for the thrill that comes with dangling hundreds of feet above the earth. Or at least I was. But you have to pace yourself. A fall from 30 feet can be just as fatal as a fall from 400, and if I was going to go out, I knew which one I'd rather take. Most of the time you'll see tower climbers clipping a carabiner to each rung to fasten themselves in place as they go. I don't bother with that unless it's a windy day, and it wasn't. In fact, the air seemed unnaturally still as I climbed. If I were a wiser man, I might have paid more attention to the prickle at the back of my neck or the sense of foreboding in my gut. But as you've probably guessed, I am not, so I didn't. Instead, I chalked it up to coffee jitters and doubled my pace. Probably just needed to take a leak. Have you ever pissed off a 400-foot tall object? It's just as awesome as it sounds. I was around halfway up when I realized that the fog around me had grown more dense rather than less, which was strange. Usually when you get a bit of height and the sun starts to burn away the mist, you can see just fine. Typically, it's all but gone by 2 p.m., leaving you free and clear to jump from the top. I'd already picked out a nice little meadow to the southeast of the tower where I could land and have a nice easy hike back to the Jeep. If I couldn't see it though, that would be a problem. I'm not suicidal after all. It looked like my dreams were shattered for the day. The fog around me was so dense now that if I hadn't known better, I would have thought a storm was rolling in. But the weather forecast hadn't mentioned any chance of a storm, and there was still no wind. It was strangely silent except for the dull ring of my boots on the rungs and my own breath in my ears. I paused to take a break around halfway up. There are altitude markers painted on the cell tower so you can mark how far you've come, and I just passed 150 feet. Clipping a carabiner on the rung above me for the first time that day, I leaned back and stretched, enjoying the feeling of weightlessness. I glanced down, something the veteran climbers tell you never to do. And that's when I saw it. Down below me, shrouded in mist, a shape clung to the side of the tower. I say shape because I didn't get a clear look at it. Just a shadow, maybe 100 feet below, so far away that I couldn't even tell if it was moving. The fuck? Now, I know I'm not Shakespeare, but I doubted old Bill would have reacted any differently than I did. I mean, why would anybody be climbing a cell tower in backwoods Appalachia on a day like this? Anyone besides me, that is. My first thought was that it was one of the graffiti artists who, finding their skills limited by the canvas of the old maintenance shed, had grown the balls to climb the tower and add a little color to the gray steel. Good on them. Might make for a bit of an awkward meeting when they caught up to me, but I wasn't about to call the cops or anything. I even debated hanging around until they got a little closer, but I decided against it. That was my first and only good decision that day. Probably the one that saved my life. I kept climbing, reasoning that if my fellow climber made it to the top while I was still around, I'd congratulate them on their courage and ask them nicely to paint over one of the lights so that the company would send me out here in a month or two and I could get my jump on. I reached the 200-foot mark and took another break, feeling the cold, wet air on my cheek, scratching under my thick beanie. The company tells you to wear a helmet, but I figure that at heights like this, I'd prefer my cranium to liquefy on impact if I fall. Quick and painless. I took another look down to see how my mysterious friend was doing. It was closer. I say it because it took my brain a few seconds to register that the thing climbing up the tower toward me wasn't human. It had closed the distance between us by a few dozen feet, and it was impossible to mistake. Its arms were too long, its body too short. I caught a glimpse of dark, glistening skin through the mist, a face twisting on a knobbly neck, two eyes that were pale and milk white like an old man's cataracts. I blinked. It was still there. One long arm swung over the other with unnatural grace, a hand large enough to swallow the entire rung curling around steel. The fuck? Now, I'm not superstitious or religious or philosophical or political or really anything at all. I'm a monkey-brained tower climber, and when I saw the thing that was following me up the tower, my monkey brain took right over. I scurried up the rungs, throwing caution to the wind, my brain trying to account for what I was seeing. Some kind of prank? A TV show, right? With an absolutely insane budget? A dozen half-hearted attempts at reason flew through my mind. Each one as pathetic as the last. I climbed until I was out of breath, and my mind, looking for excuses and coming up empty, swung back around to, did I really just see that? I risked a glance down. The thing was still below me, and gaining. It climbed in eerie silence. Not growling or snarling like a wild animal, just the quiet, fluid determination of a predator stalking prey. I caught a flash of movement of a snub-nosed face, of naked skin, and a mouth full of black teeth. I'd given an old meth head some change once, and she'd flashed me a rotten grin full of teeth like that. There was only one way down now, and that was up. I climbed as quickly as I could, throwing caution to the wind. The 300-foot mark passed in a blur. Then 350. I was starting to flag, every breath burning in my lungs. I could taste copper in my mouth, and my eyes were blurry. I started to get clumsy. I missed a rung with my foot, almost falling. I clung there, terrified that I would feel long fingers close around my foot. I kicked the rungs once, then managed to get my boots back in place and kept going. I reached the tower's uppermost platform. The trapdoor was locked, secured by a padlock. Of course it was locked. I tore a glove off with my teeth and let it spiral away, fumbling in my pocket for the key. Nothing. My entire body was seizing with fear. The piss that I'd been saving for the top of the tower was running down my leg. I unhooked the hammer on my tool belt and bashed the padlock. It came open, bouncing off my arm. I shoved open the door and hauled myself through, landing on the small platform at the top like a trout from a creek. Through the grates, I could see the thing right below me. It opened its mouth, jaw cracking to reveal a mouth that was too wide. Inside that mouth was another mouth, and another, and another. I screamed. Well, I did my best with whatever air was left in my lungs. It sounded more like a whimper or a sob. I stood with my back to the top of the tower, watching as it moved half-hidden below me. I slung one leg over the railing at the edge of the platform and checked the straps of my parachute. The sky was gray in every direction. Nothing but endless, mind-numbing gray. Looking back, I feel as though I should have at least had some idea of where the sun was, but there was nothing, just an endless field of twilight. I couldn't tell which direction I was facing or where the meadow I'd planned to land in could be. I'd be jumping blind, into the fog, no idea of where I was heading or even how close I was to Earth. It was insane, but it was my only option. As the creature lifted one glistening arm over the edge of the tower, ready to haul itself up and after me, I threw myself off. Normally, this is where I let out a whoop, revel in the feeling of the wind in my face, the weightlessness. This time, I fell in silence, eyes full of freezing tears, the cold wind scouring my skin and hair. I had a pair of goggles slung around my neck to shield my face, but I'd forgotten to put them on. I seized the ripcord and pulled for all it was worth. There was a reassuring snap of nylon against the air, followed by a bowel-loosening tug and my feet kicking out in front of me. Thankfully, instinct took over, giving my overtaxed brain a break. I glanced up and over my shoulder, wind whistling in my ears, but I could see no sign of the creature above me. I hauled on the steering lines, straining to see any sign of the ground below. There was nothing. A few long moments passed. Then I caught sight of a tree spearing through the mist. Another followed, then another, and then I was sailing between them, branches slapping my face, battering my arms and legs. I flew free of the trees and straight into the side of the fence at the base of the tower. Razor wire slashed my hands as I struck the top of the fence with enough force to knock the wind out of me. I fell backward, landing in the dirt, shredded nylon billowing down to cover my face. I struggled free from the remains of my chute and unbuckled the pack, leaving it all in a heap by the fence. I limped for the Jeep. Above, I could see no sign of the creature. I hauled the door open and started the engine, praying that the faulty spark plug I'd been meaning to replace for months would do me this one last solid. The engine sputtered to life. Something flew overhead, a blur. I caught sight of long limbs spread wide, of membranous wings billowing in the wind. Eyes locked on mine as the predator glided silently overhead, banking, turning toward me. I threw the Jeep into reverse, tires spinning in loose dirt. My head bounced off the headrest as I crashed through the gate. Then I was off, jostling down the gravel-packed road. I didn't stop driving until I reached home. Autopilot must have kicked in because I drove myself to the ER. They must have thought I was some kind of crazy person, eyes wide, pants soaked with piss. They had to peel my fingers off from the bloody steering wheel before they could get me inside. It's been 2 weeks now, and the stitches across my arm and hands are only just healing. I'll have the scars for the rest of my life. I'm writing this with the doors locked and my stepdad's old 12-gauge leaned against the desk next to me. I should get a dog, maybe 2. The mist is back, and somehow the mountains just don't seem as safe as they used to. The screen of my phone just lit up. A text from the company. Another job. Another site. I don't think I'll answer. Over the course of the next few minutes, the subject of our final story will learn one lesson the hard way. That a person's true intentions are revealed through their actions, and that in the end, this is the sole factor in deciding their fate. I think the girl I took home might have been dead. Hear me out. I'm not a creep or an incel or a Me Too type of guy, so don't judge me or anything before you hear everything I'm about to tell you. I met this girl at a bar. She was a little quiet. When I first saw her, she was sitting alone in the corner. I had maybe drunk a little too much, and if I were sober, maybe I would have noticed the weird smell she had or the vacant look in her eye, but I didn't. I asked if she needed a ride home or if there was someone she wanted me to call, but she didn't say anything. I know how this sounds, but honest, I had the best intentions. I asked if she wanted some water or a coffee. Did she have any friends with her? Nothing. Nada. Zilch. She didn't say anything. I know if it were me and someone found me in this bad of shape, I'd want them to take care of me, so that's what I did. I got an Uber because I was in no shape to drive, and I helped her walk out of the bar. Man, was she messed up. She had this weird 2-step stagger when she moved, like a little lean to one side, but she was still really pretty. The Uber guy was on the fence about letting us in his car. He said she needed a doctor. He asked if she would get blood on his car and pointed at the gash in her leg. I touched it, and it seemed like it had dried. I told him she must have fallen or something. We were both pretty smashed, and getting home was for the best. He definitely didn't want us in the car, but maybe he felt sorry for how drunk I was. I mean, I could barely walk because I was so drunk. Otherwise, I'd definitely not take someone home like this. I went to Catholic school, for God's sake. Anyway, she didn't have a purse or an ID or a phone or anything. I swear, I asked like several times where she lived, and she never said anything. I was stuck with this girl who was a mess, and I was definitely super drunk and not sure what to do, so I decided to take her to my house, but not in a Harvey Weinstein way, like in a normal way. I had the best intentions. We got to my house, and I double-checked that she was okay with going in. I said I would be glad to have the Uber take her somewhere else. I'm pretty sure the driver heard this. You could ask him. She didn't say anything other than like this little growl hiss sound, so I figured maybe she was hungry. I took her inside in a definitely platonic with no bad intention kind of way and sat her on the sofa. I told her I'd get her something to eat. I asked what she liked, but she didn't say anything. I'm pretty sure she felt more comfortable here than at the bar. I was confident I was doing the right thing. I figured maybe she wasn't hungry, so I sat down next to her, like in a friendly way, not in a sort of stranger danger way. She didn't move. I leaned in close, just to see if maybe she was speaking low and I couldn't hear her, not for any other reason, really. I put my arm around her in case she was cold. If she had said to move it, I definitely would have, no questions asked, but she didn't, so I figured it was fine. That's when everything went downhill. Without any warning, she turned and bit my arm. I didn't know human teeth could sink so deep. She ripped her face away and took a mouthful of my arm with her. I pulled away and she jumped on top of me, but not in a, inappropriate way. She clawed and bit at my face. It took all my strength to throw her off. I tried to run, but she was on me in a flash. By her own choice, mind you. I didn't know what to do. I reached for the closest thing, a laptop stand, and hit her head with it. She went limp and fell. I wasn't trying to kill her, I swear. I have 3 younger sisters. Not calling the police isn't an admission of guilt. Where she bit me started to itch like crazy. I probably should have called an ambulance. When I wrapped her with a rug, it was definitely about cleanliness, not hiding her body. I'm a good person. I scratched the bite as it spread up my arm. Maybe I needed a shot. Maybe it was a bacterial infection and I needed some antibiotics. Either way, I didn't do any of that. I just kept scratching. I wore a jacket so that the bite wouldn't bleed everywhere, not to hide evidence. When the jacket sleeve became crusty with blood, I should have probably gotten a skin graft. I should have probably gotten my arm amputated, but I didn't. I kept scratching. I scratched until my arm was numb and I couldn't even feel it. I knew it itched though. I pulled back my sleeve and looked down at the purple and green skin and layers of orange pus. The way the skin peeled back and the crusty way it tried to scab. I knew it was itchy, even if I couldn't feel it anymore. It was a lot harder to drive with one hand, but I really couldn't feel this infected, crusty limb attached to my shoulder. I should have probably gone to a hospital. I'm not saying my story might have sounded suspicious to a nurse or a doctor, or even a cop, because that's definitely not why I drove to a swamp. When I took her body out of my truck, the itch started to creep up my neck. That itchy, scratchy tingle. I could feel it going for my cheek. I rubbed my face on the collar of my stinky, crusty jacket to make it go away. Maybe some vitamins would have done the trick, or an essential oil. I hear high alkaline water is a lifesaver. It was probably too late for that anyway. I don't believe zombies are real, but if they were, I think this is what it would feel like to be bitten by one. I didn't unroll the rug when I dumped her body into the water because I thought alligators would eat her. Sometimes you can't explain your actions. Maybe this bite on my arm was messing with my mind. I did feel feverish. I'm a great guy. This is out of character for me. When the itch spread to my eye and it got hard to drive home, I should have gone to an eye doctor to see what this infection was. I tried blinking it out, but it kept itching. This is definitely not a confession. I don't think I dumped her body in a malicious way. Even if it feels good at the time, never scratch your eye with a set of car keys. If I wasn't so lazy, I could have gotten some eye drops, or a hot compress would have helped. But I didn't do any of that. I kept on keeping on. It's not like I'm afraid to look at my face in the mirror because I'm worried my flesh is rotting off. Zombies are make-believe. My scalp is drying out. My hand comes back with clumps of hair after I try to make the itching stop. I think I'm dying, but not in a living dead way. I'm starting to smell like that girl. I don't know what this infection is, but it's getting worse. I should post this in a medical sub or telemed. I should email my doctor, but I'm not going to. I'm sharing it with you instead. This post isn't any kind of admittance of guilt or trying to clear my conscience because I didn't do anything wrong. But the more I think about that girl, the more I realize that maybe something was wrong with her and whatever it was is happening to me.